Hello again, fight fans. I'm Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly. You're watching the Neutral Corner for the week of May 27th. Oh man, we got a lot to talk about. There was a ton of boxing last week. I actually was on vacation in San Diego with Tiffany. We just needed to get out of the city, get out of LA for a few days. San Diego, beautiful, beautiful place. Pound for pound, all things considered, might be the greatest city in America, just as far as livability. If you haven't been, I highly recommend. But back to boxing. So much stuff to talk about, guys. We're going to split this episode of TNC into two parts. This first part will be news and notes and fight review. The second part will come out a day later, and that will be the fight preview. Of course, this week, we got a big one. This is a great, great matchup. 2017, the year that keeps on giving. Let's get to some news and notes. All right, so where do I start, man? This has just been a crazy, crazy week. Let's start with probably the king of the crazies, Adrien Broner. He's going to jail for 3 days, and this stems back to a disorderly conduct charge from 2014. So this guy has stuff that's still coming back to haunt him from years ago. He's only doing 3 days in jail. I believe his camp is still negotiating a fight. I think he has a pretty interesting fight coming up if all things, the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, which I think they will be. He's going to have an interesting fight coming up later this year. So the jail time isn't affecting that. It's just, it just seems a week or two can't go by without Adrien Broner being in the news for something stupid. Let's see. More stupidity. Shannon Briggs fails a drug test. VADA drug test. And this wasn't even a blood test. This was just a regular urine test. But VADA, look, you guys know I talk about them a lot. Check out my article in the May issue of Boxing Monthly. Yeah, I talk about these guys a lot because they're the best. And they catch guys more, they catch athletes popping more than anybody else. And it's not because they're the performance-enhancing drugs police. It's because they're trying to secure or ensure clean sport. And yes, some athletes find a way to game the system. They always will. They always have, they always will. But the best testing we have is VADA. But for Shannon Briggs to fail, and I guess he came back with a super high TE ratio, super high testosterone levels. Is anyone surprised? This dude is jacked. He's ungodly jacked, and he's in his 40s. I've met Shannon up close a few times at different fights here in LA and in New York. And look, man, I'm a big guy, right? But I don't lift. I used to lift. I don't really lift anymore. But I've been in enough gyms and I've done enough lifting in my time to know which guys are natural and which guys are borderline. And just shaking Shannon's hand and kind of giving him a hug, you could sense what's going on right there. So no one's surprised by this. Now, he had a fight scheduled for the WBA, some motherfucking version of their title, I can't remember what it was, against Okendo. And now I guess that's being called off for Okendo, who legally, he's got the WBA by the balls. He's still going to be in line for that title shot. I don't know if it'll be the next available contender, but when you think over the last couple years, the guys that have been in line, not even the last couple years, the last year, the guys who have been in line to fight for this shitty version, this worthless version of this title, but have popped and have been taken out of consideration because they've popped for something. By the time they finally have a fight, it's going to be two guys that are maybe in the top 50. Maybe in the top 50, but maybe not in the entire heavyweight division. Who gives a shit about this fight if it ever materializes? But that's what's going on right now with Shannon Briggs, Okendo, and the amazing, the glorious WBA. And we'll talk more about them later in this episode specifically. Staying with boxing commissions, the Association of Boxing Commissions, has recommended banning Leon Lawson. For those of you who don't know who the hell Leon Lawson is, he is the uncle of Andre Dirrell, who I'll be talking a lot about later on in this episode. So that's hot off the press. Miguel Cotto has officially parted ways with Roc Nation Sports, or maybe Roc Nation Sports has parted ways with Miguel Cotto, depending on which side of the story you hear from. You know who left who. I don't know. Maybe it was mutual. I don't think so. I think this has to deal with just the financials. So when Miguel Cotto first signed with Roc Nation, the rumors were that it was a 3-fight deal, upwards of $50 million. Apparently, those numbers are a little exaggerated. I think that those numbers included pay-per-view upside or something like that. The guarantee for each pay-per-view fight was 8 figures. 8 figures. So when I hear a promoter or anyone say 8 figures, to me that means $10 million or a little over. It doesn't mean 20 million or 30. It means 10 to 11, 12 million dollars. So that's basically what Cotto is getting per fight. I do know this. The only fight that Roc Nation remotely made a dime on with Cotto was his fight with Canelo Alvarez back in 2015. That was a massive fight. Golden Boy Promotions made a ton of money in that fight, okay? Roc Nation barely broke even. They made just a little bit of money. So if that was the best you could do against Canelo Alvarez, who the hell was Cotto going to fight to justify that guarantee he has in his contract? So apparently the two sides came to some sort of agreement to buy out the rest of Cotto's contract. So I don't know the exact number, but it had to be a few $1 million to buy him out of that deal. And so Roc Nation wouldn't have to pay out the fight guarantee, right? So somewhere in the middle of that, 8-figure guarantee and 0, that's what Cotto got paid. So now what's up with Cotto? Is he retiring? No, he's not retiring. In fact, he's still probably going to fight Yoshihiro Kamagai. It was supposed to happen in June, then it was July, now they're talking about August. I think ultimately it's going to be pushed till September. Don't be surprised if it gets pushed to late August, early September. But Yoshihiro Kamagai is a Golden Boy Promotions fighter. Cotto has worked with Golden Boy Promotions, negotiated with them before. He has his own promotional outfit, so he'll probably just sign with his own promotional outfit with Golden Boy Promotions to fight Kamagai. And where that fight will be held, they're talking about Los Angeles. They're talking about LA. I don't know exactly which venue. The Forum, that's kind of what I'm hearing, and I think that's what makes sense, something like the Forum. And apparently it's going to be for the title that Canelo Alvarez is vacating to fight Gennady Golovkin. That 154-pound title that he was kind of holding on to while fighting at these insane catch weights and all this stuff. So Canelo is vacating that title that he won last year off of Smith. And now Cotto is going to fight for that title. Vacant title against Kamagai. Do any of you really give a shit? I don't know. If it's on regular TV here in Los Angeles and it has a good co-feature or something, maybe that will be fun. You got to figure that's going to be on HBO, regular HBO, and maybe it will follow up a pay-per-view card or something like that. That's why I think ultimately the date might get pushed back, because maybe they'll take, I'm just brainstorming here, I haven't heard anything, but I'm just saying, the Canelo Golovkin fight, if you needed a replay, maybe you put something at the back of that, like this Cotto Kamagai fight. Maybe you put it the week before Canelo Golovkin to help kind of promote that fight and do some, marketing and stuff like that. Who knows? But staying on the island of Puerto Rico, they're talking about Felix Verdejo, Terry Flanagan, sometime in July in New York City. So I guess Verdejo's people are sick of babying him, and they're going to throw him in there with Flanagan and see what happens. Look, all things considered, yeah, Verdejo has peaked, if not maybe regressed a little bit. But just with the physical tools he has and fighting in New York, I favor him over Flanagan, man. So, look, that's it with the news and notes right now. There's a ton of fights to talk about that happened last week, so let's get into the review. So Thursday night in Tucson, Arizona, it was another Golden Boy Promotions on ESPN card. And this was supposed to be on regular ESPN, but I think there was a college baseball game or something that ran late. So the card started on ESPN2, and then when that game ended, they moved it over to ESPN. So the broadcast got a little bit screwed up. And, you know, on paper, I thought this was going to be a fun little ESPN card. Turned out to be a little bit underwhelming, though. But Diego De La Hoya gets a 10-round decision win over Eric Ruiz. And Demetrius Ballard gets a unanimous decision over 10 rounds as well over Adrian Luna Flores. So the action, you know, you're hoping for maybe some knockouts and stuff. Those two headlining fights, just, you know, they were decent, entertaining scraps, just nothing really amazing there, you know. In Brooklyn, Heather Hardy, female fighter, wins an 8-round unanimous decision over Adina Kiss. Heather Hardy kind of building up a profile for herself out there in the East Coast. These were 2-minute rounds, which I just hate. I hate the 2-minute rounds, man. I think females should fight under the exact same rules as males fight if you really, really want to build yourself up and build this female boxing thing up. So that was it for Thursday. Not a whole lot of action Friday, but Saturday, man, there was a ton of stuff going on. So let's start over in Tokyo, where if you remember on last week's episode in the preview, I told you guys that this was kind of set up just matchmaking-wise, location-wise, all of it, for these three guys, these three Japanese fighters to win titles. And I'm not saying that in any kind of shady way. I didn't think there would be any kind of bad scorecards or anything like that. I just favored the Japanese fighters in these matchups. I thought that all things considered, it was great matchmaking for these three fighters. And I thought that they were going to come away with these titles. And it turns out I was right, except a few judges, 2 judges disagreed with me in the main event. But in the 2 subsequent fights to the main event, Daigo Higa scored a 6-round TKO stoppage over Mexican Juan Hernandez Navarrete to win the vacant WBC flyweight title. Really, really great performance. Exciting fighter. So I want to see more of this kid. Ken Shiro wins a majority decision over Ganigan Lopez to win the WBC 108-pound title, or junior flyweight, super strawweight, whatever you want to call it, title. The judges scored that fight 115, 113 twice. One judge had it 114, 114. And I saw some people on Twitter asking, was this home cooking? I don't think so. I think that this was just a really close competitive fight that Shiro edged out. In fact, the judges were American and Canadian. The judges and the ref. It was a mixture of American and Canadian crew, officials. I think one of them was a guy born in Italy but now lives in America. So there were no Japanese officials working this fight. I didn't see any kind of home cooking or anything like that. Coincidentally, the controversial scores were in the main event, where Hassan N'Dam scores a split decision over Ryota Murata to win the vacant WB Weeby Assholes 160-pound title. There was a knockdown. There was 2 knockdowns in this fight, actually. There was a knockdown in the 4th round where N'Dam was put down, but there was one in the 7th round where I think the ropes held him up that the referee missed. But Raul Caiz Sr. scored this fight correctly. He had it 117-110 for Murata. Interestingly enough, it was a Panamanian judge, Gustavo Padilla, who scored it 116-111 for N'Dam, and Hubert Earl, a Canadian judge, who scored it 115-112 for N'Dam. I have absolutely no idea what the hell those 2 guys were seeing in the ring. But they've had bad scores before. And I find this interesting because the WBA sanctioned this fight. Now, you guys know, if you watch my show every week, I rant about this, but the WBA is just a complete joke. They really are the worst of all the sanctioning organizations. And we saw recently Gennady Golovkin, who had the WBA Super, and Daniel Jacobs, who had the WBA regular middleweight titles, fight to unify. Consolidate's probably a better word, because how can you unify the same fucking title in the same fucking division? They consolidated that title. 2 seconds later, Gilberto Mendoza, who heads up the WBA, sanctioned this fight between N'Dam and Murata. which neither guy, quite frankly, has any business fighting for a title. I like Murata as a prospect. He hasn't blown me away, but it's not that he's done anything to not deserve it. He just hasn't won enough fights yet, right? Maybe an eliminator or something. Anyway, these guys had no business fighting for a title. But when you look at the business, the possible business that Murata represents, and look, Top Rank signed him for a reason, right? That market over there, the Tokyo, the Japanese market's pretty big for boxing. It's growing. China's right there. That's a really growing market. So there's money to be made out there. And that's what the WBA, that's why they sanction multiple titles in the same fucking division. And I'm sorry I'm saying fuck a lot, but the WBA pisses me off. The reason why I bring all this up is because after this decision, Gilberto Mendoza went on a tirade on Facebook and on Twitter and all of them, apologizing to Japanese boxing fans everywhere and saying that his scorecard was 117, 110, I think that's what it was, somewhere around there, just like Raul Caiz had. And he posted a picture of his scorecard and said that this is horrible and blah, blah, blah. Dude, these are your fucking judges. These are your judges. And they've turned in shitty scores in fights before. So what are you ranting about? You're not ranting about something that you had no control over. This would be like if a boss hired 2 really shitty employees and they had fucked up on the job multiple times and then they fucked up again, which ended up hurting another employee's future earning prospects for the next year or so. And then the boss ranted about the 2 shitty employees and apologized to all his other employees. It makes no fucking sense. It makes absolutely no sense. In fact, it wouldn't be apologizing to the employees. It'd be that boss apologizing to all the customers of their company, even though he hired the 2 shitty employees who had repeatedly fucked up on the job. That's essentially what Mendoza's doing here. He hired these 2 shitty judges. These are WBA appointed judges who had turned in bad scores before, and then rants about the shitty score they put up and apologizes to his customers, which is the fans who watch this fight. People who bought tickets to the fight, people who paid to watch it on TV, one way or another, whatever country you watched it in, whether it was on cable, a stream, whatever. So this to me, with Mendoza, I'm not going to say corruption, okay? That word gets thrown around too much, but this is ineptitude. And somebody who is into conspiracy theories and wants to think that the WBA is trying to buy into the Japanese/Asian market might come to the conclusion that this was a setup job from the get-go so that the WBA, Gilberto Mendoza, can cry about it, can cry foul, and get Japanese fans to like him, right? To hold him up as this sincere guy that's fighting for us. And now he can sanction a rematch of this fairly interesting, entertaining fight in the ring, but had no business being a title shot. He could sanction a rematch for this title shot and be the hero when Murata wins. So now he doubles his money, and he's seen in the eyes of Japanese boxing fans as a fighter for the truth. That's Gilberto Mendoza. If you were into conspiracy theories, you could draw that conclusion from the results of this fight, because it makes no sense a Japanese undefeated prospect to get hosed by 2 foreign judges in Japan. And then for the guy who hired the judges to bitch about it. It just doesn't make any fucking sense. Anyway, there was another fight in Japan on Saturday in Nagoya. Konsei Tanaka scores a unanimous decision over Angelo Costa, a Puerto Rican fighter, to win the to make the first defense of his WBO junior flyweight title. So you had 2 Japanese fighters fighting on the same day, different regions of the country, for different versions of the 108-pound championship. Let's see these 2 fight each other. Why can't Konsei Tanaka and Ken Shiro fight each other next? Let's consolidate this shit, guys. It only makes sense. But that's what's going on here. We're probably going to see a rematch between Murata and N'Dam, and hopefully we could see a unification fight between Tanaka and Shiro. So there's some interesting things happening over in Japan. Now let's skip over a continent or two to London, where Gervonta Davis scored a third-round TKO win over Liam Smith. This was the first defense of his IBF 130-pound title. He knocked down Smith in the third round and just blew him away. And I thought that this fight had the potential to be an interesting matchup because of the styles, but it was clear from the jump that Davis was just so much stronger and more skilled and more athletic than Walsh. And to me, Walsh looked a little intimidated. And Walsh was making a big leap in opposition, hadn't fought anybody that was even at the level of a Jose Pedraza, who Davis blew away earlier this year to win his title. And sometimes fighters, you look at them, eye test, and you think that they have the style to give a guy an interesting fight. But sometimes records tell the story, man. Sometimes records don't. Sometimes you can't tell just by looking at a guy's record. Liam Walsh, you can tell kind of by looking at his record. In my opinion, he got a little exposed in this fight. He just doesn't have it at the top level. Maybe he can bounce back from this and you know, carve out a decent career. But I just think what we saw in this fight is one guy is a true contender, one guy is a pretender. So Davis now builds up the scope of himself in the UK market, which is the hottest market in boxing right now. So promoter Floyd Mayweather, a lot of people questioned, why is he shipping Davis over there to the UK to fight Walsh? I think that this was smart business from Mayweather, smart matchmaking. Well, they had to fight Walsh, but going over there to fight him, you make more money, you build up your audience in the hottest market in the sport. So now Davis, if he wants to go back over there and fight in England again, he's going to have a bigger crowd and he's going to have fan interest. For Davis now, he's 18-0, 17 knockouts. You know, he did not make weight on the first attempt or the second. He had to come in 3 times, but he was only a couple of ounces over. And the IBF has their second-day rehydration weigh-in, right? And he came to that weigh-in and passed with flying colors. So I think people are making a little bit too much of the weight issue. I think Davis probably should come over earlier if he's going to fight in the UK or anywhere overseas ever again. He needs to come over 2 or 3 weeks earlier. I think too many American fighters go over there with just a few days to spare, and that's not the way to do it. Stuff like that has an effect on your body, man. Bloating, carrying weight. If you eat too much salt while you're traveling, and it's easy to do that when you're flying on a plane and eating that shitty plane food, any of that stuff, you're going to retain water more. All that stuff plays a factor. So you hear people talk about he's going to have to move up to lightweight. Not for a while. He's going to be at 130 pounds for a while. And, you know, there's a lot to like with Gervonta Davis, but guys, stop talking about Vasyl Lomachenko. He's not ready for that. He's only 22. Give him time to develop. I understand he has a title. I'd like to see him fight other top 10 fighters, but not Lomachenko. Not quite ready. I saw a tweet earlier today that I thought was outstanding. And I'm paraphrasing, but it said basically, so it's okay for, or it's not okay for Davis to fight Lomachenko because he's only 22, but it was okay for Canelo to fight Mayweather when he was 22, right? Talking about double standards. I thought that was a great tweet, and I retweeted that. But I want to be clear, and I want to double down on this. I thought that tweet was awesome. It shows the double standard idiot boxing fans have that are trying to say, look, man, Davis shouldn't fight Lomachenko, because there's some people calling for it, and Davis fans, Floyd Mayweather fans, are saying, no, he's too young. But those were the same guys that hold this win Floyd had over Canelo Alvarez in such high esteem, as if it was this amazing accomplishment. My opinion is, I have no desire to see Gervonta Davis fight Vasyl Lomachenko yet. A year, 2 years down the road? Hell yeah, but not yet. I had absolutely no desire to see Canelo fight Floyd Mayweather when he did. I think they signed that fight when Canelo was 22. By the time the fight actually happened, I think Canelo was 23. And Floyd Mayweather defenders and fanboys and just ignorant casual fans, look at that as one of Floyd's top 5 career achievements. And, you know, maybe they're right, which kind of speaks more to the massive asterisks on Floyd Mayweather's resume and just how lackluster in terms of the greatest fighter ever Floyd's resume is. But guys, Canelo had, 30, 40 some odd fights. I don't remember the exact number. Yeah, he had won titles. And Floyd fanboys bring that up when they talk about Floyd beating Canelo in that fight. But he had fought one top-level fighter at that point, and that was Austin Trout. And he struggled with Trout. He won that fight. I thought he won it, but it was competitive. He lost rounds in that fight. He went from that fight to fighting Floyd Mayweather. It doesn't matter if he had 30 some odd fights before then. It's not as if Canelo had this extensive amateur career. He went pro when he was like 15, 16 years old, okay? He won his first title off Matthew Hatton, I believe. Not Ricky Hatton, Matthew Hatton. If you look at the guys he had beat up until that Floyd Mayweather fight, he was not ready. Just wasn't ready. When you look at Davis and who he's beat now, he's beat, Jose Pedraza, good quality fighter. Liam Walsh, good quality young fighter. Neither of those guys are even on the level of an Austin Trout, okay? Maybe collectively they equate to an Austin Trout. But Davis isn't ready, okay? Remember what happened in that Floyd versus Canelo fight. That's exactly how a Lomachenko-Davis fight would look right now. I understand why Canelo's people did it back then, because they had the excuse when they lost of saying, we weren't ready for that fight and Floyd drained us 2 pounds. Plus, there was a lot of zeros on that check. They made a ton of money. It increased their scope and their visibility with casual boxing fans. And now, in Canelo's subsequent, or his fights with Gennady Golovkin and other guys, all those Floyd Mayweather fans are going to become Canelo Alvarez fans. Who do you think Floyd Mayweather fans are rooting for when Canelo fights Golovkin? Come on. And it all stems back to that fight. So that was smart matchmaking at the time for Canelo's team and Floyd's team. The difference here is Lomachenko doesn't bring all the zeros for Davis. And Davis doesn't bring any name recognition or really that much of a challenge for Lomachenko. So that fight doesn't make sense. Let's stop talking about it. Let's see Davis develop himself and fight some of the other top 10 guys, and then see if he wants to go after Lomachenko coming up, okay? Now, over here in the United States, let's start at the MGM National Harbor. And there was some interesting action going on in the ring during fights and after fights. But in the main event, Gary Russell scores a 7th round TKO over Oscar Escandón, knocked him down in the 3rd round, beat him up from pillar to post, defends his WBC featherweight title. The fact that it took him 7 rounds is kind of sad, but that's just, look, dominant performance. Russell looked amazing in this fight because he was fighting Oscar Escandón. And not to take anything away from him, but this was beautiful, perfect matchmaking. Russell's going to look great against this kind of guy. Russell has very fast hands. He's extremely skilled. Doesn't hit very hard, but man, he's skilled. And he's got just probably among the best hand speed in all of boxing right now. Doesn't fight often enough, and the only time he stepped up and fought an elite fighter, he was thoroughly dominated. So, am I interested in seeing him against the other top featherweights? Yeah. I'd love to see him fight the winner of Leo Santa Cruz and Abner Mares, their rematch, or maybe a Carl Frampton or a Quigg. That division's loaded, and politically, he's on the right side of the aisle with his management. So a ton of fights could be made, but let's start seeing those fucking fights. I'm sick of seeing this guy not fight for a year and then come back in a showcase fight like this. It doesn't interest me at all. I didn't... Full disclosure, I didn't watch the fight. I just watched some highlights and read some statistics and talked to a few people who were there, some of the officials or whatever. That's it. I didn't even watch the goddamn fight because there was no need to. Anyway, in the co-feature, Andre Dirrell wins by disqualification after the 8th round over Jose Uzcategui, and I've heard his last name said like 8,000 different ways in the last week. To me, it looks like Uzcategui, so that's how I'm going to say it. To win the interim IBF super middleweight title, which is pretty much meaningless because now he's in line to fight James DeGale, who has the regular IBF title. And James DeGale would slap the shit out of Andre Dirrell for 12 rounds and possibly even stop him late. Based on styles, he'd easily win a 12-round decision. So this interim IBF title is bullshit. But here's the thing. This fight was disqualified because of the ending, right? Uzcategui, who I think was going on his way to winning this fight, even by decision, I thought he was about to knock out Dirrell. By the way, the judges, after that last round, had Uzcategui ahead 77-75, 77-74. One judge somehow had this fight a draw, which I thought was egregious because I thought Uzcategui was clearly in command. I thought Dirrell had some good middle round moments to kind of tighten things up, but Uzcategui started well, and then he started to take over as the later rounds were approaching. So, anyway, let's get to the meat of it. The end of the 8th round, there was a left hook that landed just before the bell, split second before the bell. A follow-up straight right hand, which looked soft, but if you see the replay, particularly, this was Uzcategui landing these punches on Dirrell, who was up on the ropes. When you see the replay, particularly from behind Dirrell or even beside him, and you see how straight that right hand was shot, it was really short, but he was punching down, Uzcategui was, and it had a lot of leverage on it. If you see the way he threw that punch short and straight, that hurt Dirrell. That was just as the bell was ringing. I thought Dirrell was on Queer Street. Ropes were holding him up, was about to go down. And then after the bell rang, a follow-up left hook lands. Dirrell goes down. Looks hurt, visibly hurt, but not unconscious. Was responding. But then it appeared there was some talking between him and his corner. A few words were exchanged, some glances, right? Some hand gestures. And then, I can't fight on, right? This whole act started. And for those of you who have followed Andre Dirrell's career, and I've followed both Dirrell brothers' careers because they're Michigan guys. So, growing up, I heard a lot about them, and I've followed them for a very long time. They know this sport. Their family knows the sport very well. And they know that in a situation like this, you kind of cry foul and you get out of there with a DQ win. Win today, look good tomorrow. That's the motto, right? And look, let's be clear. Uzcategui's left hook after the bell was a foul. He had been warned earlier in the fight about punching after the bell. I can't remember which round it was. It was one of the earlier rounds. But to me, it looked accidental. Now, it's borderline because it was literally boom, boom, boom. It wasn't boom, 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 like that kind of a combination, right? There was a split second pause after that right hand with a left hook. Now, was it Uzcategui waiting for the bell to sound, then throwing it? Or was it him getting a little bit better alignment with his shoulders, with his feet, before he threw the left hook to make it a finishing blow? That's what I think it was. It wasn't boom, boom, oh, the bell just rang, let me hit him because I'm a dirty fighter. No, it was boom, boom, adjust, boom. That's what it was. And I thought that it was a flowing combination. I thought referee Bill Clancy should have been on top of that to stop it sooner. But even when that happened, okay, Bill Clancy should have immediately sent Uzcategui to his corner, or to a neutral corner, I should say, even though it was after the bell, and he should have given Andre Dirrell 5 minutes to recover. Should have immediately called it out to the judges, to the officials, on all four sides of the ring. Accidental foul, punch after the bell. 1 point, 1 point, 1 point, right? You take a point. Each side. So everyone, it's very, very clear. You take a point immediately. If you thought it was egregious, take 2 fucking points because you had warned them already about it. You give Dirrell 5 minutes. This was an accidental foul. And according to the rules, as far as I understand it, with an accidental foul like this that causes an injury, whether it's a cut, a headbutt, whatever it is, a punch after the bell, if it's accidental, You give the guy 5 minutes. If he can't continue, you go to the cards, and the winner wins by technical decision. That's what should have happened. What did happen is Bill Clancy, the ref, said that the punch knocked Dirrell, quote unquote, unconscious. Those were his words, unconscious, and that Dirrell couldn't continue. Pat Pinella, the executive director of the Maryland State Commission, had their ring doctor, John Stewart, conduct a medical evaluation on Andre Dirrell, and he determined that Dirrell was unfit to continue. So they waved it off at that point. Okay, fine. You did your evaluation, unfit to continue, cool. Go to the cards. Go to the cards at that point and let the judges decide the fight. The only reason you would call it a disqualification is if you thought without a shadow, without any reasonable doubt, that what Uzcategui did was malicious with the intent to clearly punch and hurt this fighter after the bell, which we've seen before with Andre Dirrell. When he fought Arthur Abraham back in the Super 6 tournament in Michigan, in Detroit. I remember that fight vividly, okay? Arthur Abraham clearly, maliciously meant to hit Dirrell after the bell. It wasn't a big punch, and I thought that Dirrell was faking and acting a little bit. But I thought clearly Arthur Abraham should have been disqualified in that fight, if not suspended for his actions. That is not what happened here. And I think that the Maryland authorities really fucked this up. Even though the fighter had been warned, there was a punch after the bell, all that's legit. Medical evaluation, the ring doctor, he knows more than we could know, guys. Maybe Dirrell's a great actor. Maybe his eyes were glassy and the doctor saw something he didn't like. Fine. Send it to the cards. Now, that wasn't even the worst of it. That wasn't even the worst of it, okay? Because after all this, after the commission mishandled this whole situation, now the fighters actually embrace. Everything's calmed down, right? There was some pushing and shoving. I think Anthony Dirrell was involved in some of that, the brother, some of the other family members. The whole Dirrell camp is family members, cousins, uncles, all that kind of shit, right? And there was some pushing and shoving. After all of that, Leon Lawson, who I talked about earlier in my news and notes, the uncle of Andre Dirrell, walks across the ring. This is how premeditated this action was. Walks across the ring, fronts like he's going to talk to one of Uzcategui's, I think, trainers, his chief second, some talking in this direction. Uzcategui's here. Out of the corner of his eye, he's looking at him to make sure he's not watching him because Uzcategui's talking to somebody. It comes with a full-fledged left hook, as hard as he could throw it. And this dude must outweigh Uzcategui by 100 pounds almost. Flush on the chin. Sweat flies off Uzcategui. You've seen the punch in slow motion on Twitter and stuff, I'm sure by now. Showtime replayed it over and over. Just nailed the guy. Tries to follow up with a second punch. So not just one sucker punch. He didn't steal on him once. He tried a second one. And somehow, maybe because Lawson is so fat and unathletic, maybe it's because Uzcategui's reflexes moved him back, so he kind of slipped it. I think the right hand landed kind of on the shoulder or something. But this dude tried to punch him twice. Then all hell breaks loose. So there's pushing and shoving in the ring. There's stuff going on outside of the ring. There's a little mini melee, right? And it's not out of hand. Let's not exaggerate it. It wasn't Andrew Gallardo when he fought Riddick Bowe. It wasn't, that crazy. But it was a little bit of some ruckus going on. Somehow, this giant man, Leon Lawson, who's like 200 and some odd pounds, gets out of the ring without security personnel tackling him and stopping him, without the commission officials watching where the hell he's going. Mind you, this is at a casino where there's cameras everywhere. This dude not only makes it out of the ring, makes it out of the arena, makes it out of the casino somehow without being stopped. How does that happen? How does that happen? This was a criminal act. This was assault. Yes, casuals, I get it. It's boxing. But guess what, casuals? Boxing is a sport. What happens in a fight is one thing. What happens after a fight is different. After this fight, this was two civilians. One civilian sucker punching a guy with intent to do bodily harm. This was assault. And the Maryland police put out a warrant for his arrest. At the time I'm recording this, no arrest has been made. So the authorities in that state completely dropped the ball in this situation. And look, this MGM National Harbor, it is a new venue. That's a young commission out there handling big fights like this. They've had a few big fights that have gone off without issue. But this one, gross mishandling. From the way the end of the fight was handled, which I think, all things being considered, maybe you guys should look back into this and change it to a no contest. You know, all things being considered. I don't know. That punishes the fighter, and maybe you don't want to do that. But a DQ win for Andre Dirrell, and now he gets this full title shot against James DeGale. Does he deserve that more than Uzcategui does? Does Jose Uzcategui, was his punch, was his foul that malicious to where he gets shit out of that title money? Now, guys, decisions like this don't just piss off boxing fans. They don't just piss off writers and media people when, you know, we got to try to explain this to people. It changes a man's life. This is literally going to be the difference now between Dirrell, Uzcategui. One guy goes back to the drawing board. One guy fights. You got to figure it's going to be a six-figure payday, maybe a couple $100,000, something like that. You know, maybe more to fight James DeGale. If Dirrell ends up going over to the UK to fight DeGale, right? He's got that interim title. DeGale has the full title. Man, over in the UK, I think Dirrell is going to get paid handsomely. What am I saying? He's going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars off of a foul, an accident. These decisions affect men's lives, and these men have families. So put yourself in their shoes, man. Now, as far as Leon Lawson goes, I told you guys before about the Association of Boxing Commissions, the ABC, making their ruling. I think the WBC, even though they weren't even involved in this, but don't ever count out the WBC, for trying as much as they can to interject themselves into an ongoing trending story to get some publicity out of it. The WBC said, we're never going to let Leon Lawson work in any one of our fights. Well, good for you. You had nothing to do with this fight, but good for you. So what's Leon Lawson going to do here? I think that he should never be allowed to work in a corner again, period. Until there's been some sort of justice done here, I just don't think he should work in a corner again. If he wants to train Dirrell, if Dirrell wants to pay him as a trainer when they work out back in Flint and they prepare for a fight, cool. But actually going to the fight and being in the corner, would you want this fucking guy in the corner if you were putting your fighter up against Dirrell? I wouldn't. Unless that side wants to pay for extra security or something. No, he shouldn't be allowed to work a corner again. And for the Maryland Commission, young commission, guys, they got to step it up here. They need to go back to the drawing board, learn from this, bring in all the officials that were involved in this fight, and do some training. Look, boxing is a niche sport. And here in the United States, there are a few states that really, really run it, that have a lot of events, that have very active commissions. They get some things wrong, but they get most of it right. You guys who complain about boxing not being a mainstream sport, a high-profile sport, here's an example of what could go wrong in a new commission that is not yet, ready to handle a situation like this. Had this shit gone down in California, I can tell you right now, Lawson, he wouldn't have made it out of the ring. Louis Perry, the guy who does the security stuff out here, runs one of the biggest security companies in the world. That dude would not have let this go down. I know Mr. Perry, he's the man. Lawson wouldn't have made it out of that fucking ring, let alone the arena, okay? So there's some good with boxing expanding into these smaller markets. There's some bad. So look, pros and cons, guys, pros and cons. Also on this card, Rances Barthelemy wins a unanimous decision over Kirill Rylak. Both fighters were down in this fight. Barthelemy was down in the 5th round. Rylak was down in the 8th round. For Barthelemy, the ropes held him up. It was kind of a flash knockdown. And for Relic, he took a knee in the 8th round. Look, the scorecards for this fight, I've heard some people say they thought Relic won. Some people say, nah, Barthelemy deserved the win. Here's my thing. I didn't watch the whole fight because it's Rances Barthelemy and he's just not very entertaining. I know this. I saw the scorecards. They were way too fucking wide. From all accounts I've heard from everyone that was around there, this was more like a 7 rounds to 5 type of fight. Most you could go is 8 rounds to 4. So the scorecards were a little wide. One last note on Andre Dirrell, and then I'm going to move on from this subject. Look, Dirrell goes pro in 2005. He's been a pro for a dozen years, guys. He has 28 fights. The Arthur Abraham incident back in 2010 was winning that fight until it was stopped. That was probably the best performance of his career over a fighter in Abraham that I always thought was vastly overrated. Other than Arthur Abraham, which, again, he was winning that fight anyway before it got stopped by DQ, what big moment has Dirrell had? Seriously. He's not a guy that I'm interested in seeing again. And he's going to go up against DeGale and lose another, I think, wide decision. And don't be surprised if things get rough in that fight, he looks for a way out, because that's just kind of what this guy's done in his career. All right, let's go to Texas, Laredo, Texas, to be exact, where David Benevidez scores a 8th round TKO over Rogelio Chunky Medina. There were knockdowns in the 6th, 7th, and 8th round. And he puts him down in the 8th off an amazing 4 billion punch combination. The ref didn't even bother counting him out. He just waved the count off. So amazing performance from Benevidez, who is now 18-0, 17 knockouts. This was a WBC super middleweight eliminator fight. Right now, that title is vacant, but Callum Smith and Anthony Dirrell, the other Dirrell brother, are supposed to fight September 9th for the WBC vacant title. So Benevidez will now be in line for the winner of that fight. But WBC, who was very, very quick to jump in about the actions of one Leon Lawson, right? They haven't really said shit about some of the actions of Anthony Dirrell, who again was pushing and shoving, I think, outside the ring after all that stuff went on. So Anthony Dirrell was involved in the ruckus, and they're, depending on how far they look into that and decide to take action or not, I don't know. Will it affect the September 9th fight? I don't know. My instinct tells me that because the WBC is in business with premier boxing champions and one Mr. Al Heyman, that they're not going to look too much into what Anthony Dirrell did after that fight. They're going to opine about Leon Lawson because that's easy. That's low-hanging fruit. But they're not going to say anything about Anthony Dirrell, and that fight's still going to go off on September 9th. And David Benevidez will eventually be in line to fight Callum Smith, because that's who's going to win that fight, for the WBC title. A fight between Callum Smith and David Benevidez next year, that's going to be fun. Probably going to happen in the UK. We're gonna see a little bit of what Smith is made of when he goes up against Dirrell. I think Dirrell will find a way to lose that fight. I think Smith is the real deal. Of all the Smith brothers, he's the real deal. I think Benevidez is the real deal. Here's what we don't know about either guy. They can pitch. Can they catch? What happens when they get in there with another guy who can really pitch? The thing with Benevidez, this dude can punch. A lot of offense. He's naturally a kind of chubby, obese guy. He works out in boxing to lose weight. And he's one of these guys that if he wasn't working out would blow up and be well over 200 pounds. So he's naturally stronger because of his frame and how he shrinks down. He's naturally much stronger than most super middleweights. As far as his offensive variety, his size, he's 6'1", 76-inch reach. He's only 20 years old. He might be the best looking young prospect in American boxing right now. He's certainly among the best, at least offensively. What I want to see with him is what happens when he gets against an elite level fighter that forces him to have some defense. Because we haven't really seen what he's defensively like against a guy who can box a little bit. Also, Again, he's only 20. He's eventually going to be a light heavyweight, right? By his mid-20s, he'll be a light heavyweight. By the time he calls it a career, he might be a cruiserweight just because of his size. How is he going to look against guys where he doesn't have the same pop that he had at super middleweight and they could take his punches? How does he look then? So there's a lot of unanswered questions about Benevidez. But right now, guys, if you haven't seen that fight, just look it up on YouTube, Benevidez and Medina. Just look at the combination punching. This dude he's fun to watch. Either way, whatever happens in his career, it's going to be fun to watch his climb. All right, last card on Saturday in Madison Square Garden. Terence Crawford beats down Felix Diaz. 10th round retirement. Diaz's corner throws in the towel after the 10th round. They could have stopped it a couple rounds before that, to be honest with you. There was no need for this thing to continue. Terence Crawford, who usually will fight orthodox for the first round or two, then switch southpaw, he was just southpaw pretty much this whole damn fight. And look, for Felix Diaz, who's a good quality all-around fighter, a former Olympian, Olympic medalist, this guy is given other fighters in that division trouble, other good fighters in that division trouble. Crawford just plowed through him. I think that I don't want to get too excited because this guy was tailor-made for Crawford in the sense that Crawford looks really good against guys that he has longer arms than and is taller than. I think the tough part for Crawford is going to be when he fights a guy who is just as long, just as tall, or maybe even taller, maybe even bigger. I think that's where we're really going to see. I already know Crawford's elite. He's one of the best 5 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. But is he special? We're not going to know how special he is until he fights that guy who's longer, taller, bigger, and just as skilled. That's where we're going to find out. But for right now, Julius Indongo, who has the other 2 titles. Crawford has 2 titles. He's the real champ. He's the linear champ because of that win over Victor Postol last year. But Indongo has the other 2 titles coming off a very exciting performance. Eddie Hearn has options on him now. Terence Crawford has traveled to England before, but I don't think he'd be willing to travel over there. That fight just doesn't make sense over there. Would Eddie Hearn, with his options, be willing to match Indongo against Crawford in America, in Omaha, Nebraska? I don't know. If you're Eddie Hearn and you're thinking long-term, how much potential long-term does Indongo have? I don't know about that. Do you go for the big money fight now? Indongo wants it. He was there in the crowd watching this fight. He flew all the way from home to come over to New York to watch this fight. I'm sure he didn't pay for his ticket to the fight, but he paid for that, airline travel and the hotel and all that. That shit ain't cheap, right? So he wants the damn fight. We know Crawford wants it. Will Eddie Hearn, who has options, will Indongo's management, will they make it happen? I hope so, because if those 2 fight, look, I think it'll be way more competitive than this fight was. I still favor Crawford to destroy the guy, but I think it'll actually be interesting and competitive early on. And Indongo's a tough SOB, a tough dude. He's going to come to win. Guys, it would unify the whole division. That's what Gennady Golovkin's been talking about, trying to do forever. It's what Vladimir Klitschko tried to do. He just couldn't get Deontay Wilder to get in the ring with him. This would be a chance for Crawford to do it. That's historic stuff, so I think it matters. In the co-feature, Reymundo Beltran scores a 2nd-round knockout over Jonathan Macello. There was a headbutt that put Beltran down in the 1st round. I thought it was a legit knockdown. It was a headbutt, but I think there was a punch around it to where I think it was fine calling it a knockdown. He was clearly buzzed by it. But good action for those 2 rounds. And then a massive, I think it was a left hook that drops Macello, KO of the year candidate. Again, I don't think anything's going to top David Lemieux over Curtis Stevens because of the brutality. But if there's a number 2 to that knockout, it's probably this one, at least so far. I still have Lemieux Stevens as number 1, but this Beltran-Macello knockout is number 2. Great knockout for Beltran. This was an IBF 135-pound lightweight title eliminator. Beltran will now face the winner of the fight between Robert Easter and Denis Shafikov, which will be Robert Easter. So we're going to get to see Reymundo Beltran versus Robert Easter, probably late this year, depending on if Easter gets injured or not against Shafikov. That's a great fight. I still favor Robert Easter, but that's going to be a great fight. If I'm Robert Easter, I am demanding full VADA drug testing for that fight. Not accusing Beltran of anything, but he's had drug testing issues in the past, and he's one of these fighters who has carved out a career for himself. You know, he started almost as a journeyman, an afterthought, and he's built himself up into a quality contender. But his last two performances, he has scored devastating knockouts over young, strong fighters. He's done this as an older fighter himself. All things being considered, yes, he is in the VADA's clean boxing program, okay, which is conducted by, this is through the WBC. We don't know how many times he's been tested, though. So he is in that program. That lends me to believe that he's very, very clean, because you'd have to be an idiot to fuck with VADA or give them any chance to fuck you. Because look what just happened with Shannon Briggs, right? So you'd have to be an idiot to be taking drugs if you're part of just even a clean boxing program. But I'm just telling you right now, any guy who's ever popped for anything, if I'm managing a fighter that's going up against that guy, I want the full VADA panel for that camp. So you guys, I've explained this before, but the clean boxing program is through the WBC. They have a certain budget for that, and they give a certain amount of money to VADA, and VADA, with that budget for that month or that quarter, whatever it is, they are able to conduct an X amount of tests, and they randomly pick from all the ranked fighters in the WBC. But two guys, if they agree to do VADA testing for a fight, it's for the whole promotion, right? Or it'll start at a certain point during the promotion, depending on when they get their paperwork in. But these two guys right here, I don't know if you can see this, but we got, Klitschko, Joshua. These two guys did VADA testing for the whole fight. These guys aren't in the WBC clean boxing program, but they signed on for VADA testing for the whole fight. And that's the real thing. That's the thing that I think is the best you can do in boxing to show that, hey, this fight is on the up and up. So just seeing those last two KOs, Robert Easter, who I think is going to beat Shafikov when they fight coming up soon. If I'm his people, I want full VADA for that fight with Beltran. That's all I'm going to say. Now, that wasn't all the action this weekend. There was another fight in Japan. On Sunday, the 21st, Naoya Inoue scores a third-round knockout over Ricardo Rodriguez. This was the 5th defense of his WBO super flyweight title, 115-pound title. Now, he said in an interview after this fight, he wants to fight in the USA next. He wants to fight in September in the USA. That's when he says it'll be. And that just so happens to be when Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin are fighting. Can you imagine if Inoue is on that card? Even if he's not, you guys got to remember, Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez rematching Rungvisai. I don't have the exact date for that yet, but that's been mandated by the sanctioning body. What if Inoue fights as the co-feature on that card? Either way, American boxing fans can't lose, or boxing fans in general can't lose, but it'll be great to see Inoue fight in America. I'm excited for that, so I hope it really does happen. Man, that was a lot of action from last week. So that's it for this half of the episode. The second half will be out in 24 hours, and that will have the preview of the fights coming up this week, guys. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you at the fights.